So we're here on Daf Ches Hamud Beis, mamish towards the bottom of the Amud, and we're up to Verebi. We just have a line or a line and a half to finish yesterday's sugya. We didn't get a chance to finish. Let's just see if we count up how many lines from the bottom. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Five lines up from the bottom. The Rebbe, the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Now, the Gemara is implying a question. The Gemara just answers the question without even asking it. If you recall, just to refresh our memories from yesterday, Rebbe had a drasha of Lakcha and V'yidma, from which he derived the exclusion of Tsaras Erev. Now, if that be the case, then Rebbe does not have these drashos, these extra hays, if you want to call that, free to derive the principle of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. And what is the principle, again, just to review of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina? That if the Yavam, after he fulfills the mitzvah of Yibum, he divorces his Yavama, he's allowed to remarry her. And that's what Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina derives from V'lakcha. V'lakcha means not that he could marry on the first round, but that he could be machzir grushasa. He could remarry her after the divorce. And we had a long discussion yesterday about what the hava was. Why would we think that he... Now, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina might also use the word v'yibma, the extra hay, to teach us that Yibum is bal karch. So where would Rebbe derive these dinim? First, the din of Rabbi Yossi with regard to remarrying the Yavama after you divorced her. And the Gemara answers, Mila Isha Nafka. It says in the Pasuk, V'lakcha le'isha. It could have easily have said, V'lakcha lo, and he takes her to him. Why V'lakcha lo le'isha? And the extra word le'isha has come to teach me that she is ishto. She's completely his wife, 100%. Forget about Eishes Ach. The Erev of Eishes Ach is history. And therefore, if he divorces her, he can remarry. What about the second din? Bal Karcha. How are you going to derive from the Yibma, Bal Karcha, when you use the Yibma to teach you Tsaras Ereva? And the Gemara answers, Mi Yivama Yavo Oleha Nafka. The words Yavo Oleha imply that she has no das. It's Bal Karcha. Yavo Oleha. So the Gemara now clarifies, what is Rebbe going to derive from the Gzeira Shava of Oleha Oleha, since he already derives the principle of the exclusion of a Tsaras Erva from V'yibma, but Rebbe Hai Oleha Mai Ovidle, he doesn't have this drasha, as we said earlier, of a Gzeir Shava Oleh Oleva to patter up a Tsaras Erva from Yibum. So why did the Torah add the word Oleh? What is Rebbe going to use? What is he going to do with the pasuk Oleh? And that leads us to a little bit of a new sugya here, which I'm going to give you an introduction, which is based on the Masifta. And this has to do with a carbon chatos haba al hashogeg. Now, there are many different categories, at least 4 categories of a carbon chatos. Again, on shogeg. The classic category is going to be a chiyuv karis b'mezid, and you did it b'shogeg, you're chayiv to bring a chatos. Now, let's write down a list. Perhaps we would do it on the whiteboard. But anyway, what is the nature of this chatos? So it's either a kizba or a seira, and it's got to be a female. So it's either a female sheep, it's called a kizba, or a female goat, which is called a seira. And that's the first category. Then we get to category number 2. This is a case where the kahal, as a community, violates a chiyuv kares. How so? The highest court in Israel, the Beznat Gadol, issued a decision, and they permitted something which, in fact, they made a mistake, is really us. And the kahal, or at least most of the kahal, following this horas bezdin, violated an isur sheyesh bo kares. Now they find out that they made a mistake. In such a case, even though each individual member of Klal Yisrael may have violated this chiyuv chatas, he doesn't bring a chatas. Why? Because he was following the hora of the Beznat Gadol. And now, instead of a chatas of a yachid, we're going to have what's called a par helem davar shel tzibur. So again, we're no longer talking about a female kizba or seira. Now we're talking about a par, a male cow, or what we call a shor, right? And this is going to be a chatos hatzibur. So as far as chatos hayochid is concerned, it's a kizba or a seira. As far as chatos hatzibur is concerned, we're talking about a par. Now we have a third category, and that's called kohen mashuach, which is a kohen gadol. And he had Mashicha b'Shemen HaMishcha, and he violates an Aver b'Shogeg, he brings a par lechatos instead of a kizba or a seira. So a hejot, which means 99.99999% of the population, they will bring in a case of a chatos yachid, a kizba or a seira. In the case of a kohen mashuach, he's the Kohen Gadol, and he violated that same aver which a hedger would bring a kizba or a sira. He has to bring a par lechatos. That's called par Mashiach. Then we have a fourth category, and that's a nasi. A nasi who violates an aver b'shogeg, he too has to bring a chatos, but his chatos is different than everything that we had until now. He brings a sa'ir zachar, not a female goat, but a male goat. Now, there's another category of a korban chatas, which is also a little bit different, and that's the case of avodah zara b'shogeg. And that divides up into 2 subcategories. Number 1, a yachid who violates avodah zara b'shogeg, he brings a seira as a chatos, and that excludes a kizba. And in that sense, a yachid who violates avodah zara b'shogeg is very similar to a nasi who brings for a shkaga a sa'ir zachar. But in this case, so wait 1 second, I left out one sentence, meaning the nasi does not bring a kizba, he only brings a sa'ir, but he brings a male son. In the case of a yachid who violates avodah zara, he too is excluded from a kizba, but instead of bringing a sa'ir, meaning a male goat, he brings a seira, but he cannot bring a kizba. Then we have a case of avodah zara b'shogeg shalat tzibur. It means that in this particular case, the Horas Bezdin, which was a mistaken Horas Bezdin, was on a violation of avodah zara. The tzibur went ahead and violated avodah zara based on this mistaken ruling of the High Court. And Areya Mevim par liola v'soyer lechatos. And now we introduce another concept which is called kol shevet v'shevet. When do we have a chiyuv on each shevet to bring its own par? In two circumstances. Number one, in the case of shogag bebezdin hagadol, and most of the kol violated the hora bitos of the bezdin hagadol, then each shevet has to bring a par helik davashal tzibur. In a case where the Ras Bezdin Agadol was on a Chet of Avodah Zarah, they bring a Parli Ola and a Sawyer Lachatis. And who actually brings the par and the Sawyer? Each Shevet has to bring its own par of his Sawyer. Now, in the light of that introduction, let's go back to remind ourselves of the kasha that we're trying to answer here. What does Rebbe, who derives Soras Erva as an exclusion in Yibum from the pasuk Yibma, what does he do with the Gzeir Shava of Oleha Oleha? Or answers me by Leilichis. He needs the Gzeir Shava Oleha Oleha to teach us about chatos. Again, which chatos are we going to focus our attention on now in this? In the light of, or in the framework of this Gzeir Shava, this is going to be those chatos that are obligatory, even where there's no, I'm sorry, those chatos that are obligatory only when you violate a chiyuv kares. Kirisanya, and we'll see the difference in just a minute. Ein chayavim bezdin, and now we talk about the power heling davar shel tzibur ela al davar shes dono kares v'shigasel chatos. So the precondition for a chiyuv power heling davar shel tzibur, when the bezdin issued a mistaken ruling, and most of the tzibur followed that ruling, is a case of zdono kares. So if, for example, a yachid would not bring a chatos because the violation of the shogeg was not a chiyuv kares b'mezid, what's the case? A yachid violated an isur. Oh, it's got to be a lav. Oh, that's what we're saying. So the yachid will bring a chatos only if he violates a lav. And that lav is chomur, and it generates the mezid achiv kares. However, if let's say the yachid violated a chiyuv kares of an esed and not a losas, he doesn't bring a chatos. And par helen davar shel tzibur is going to be patterned after the chiyuv chatos of a yachid. Again, not in terms of what exactly is the nature of the carbon, because in the case of par helen davar shel tzibur, it's obviously a par, whereas it's not like a yachid is a kizbar or a seira. But forgetting about the carbon per se, the machayev is always the same. And here are the two conditions for the machayev. Number one, it has to be zdono kares. And number two, it's got to be a lot, violation of a lot. So for example, if a person violates the mitzvah of carbon pesach, he's chayav kares, but there's no chatos. And if the Bezdin Gadol would issue a mistaken ruling regarding a carbon pesach, as a result of which the tzibur violated the essay of carbon pesach, there would be no carbon Chatos partial helig dover schultz. V'chein a kohen Mashiach. He brings also a par on a shkaga, and once again, it's only going to be a par which, in the case of a yachid, of a hejot, he be chayev a chatos. Okay, looking at Daf Tes. Below the avodas kochav. And the same thing is going to apply in the case of avodas kochavim, that we said that if the tzibur violates avodas kochavim based on a mistaken ruling, and they have to bring a par. Actually, if you remember, we said you bring a par liola v'sar lechatos. Am I right? Yeah. Is el al dover shechayom al zdonon kares val shigaso chatos. Once again, the machayev here of parliola and sar lechatos for a mistaken hora and a violation of avodah zarah is identical to a yachid who's chayev for violating a zdono kares, and he brings a chatos on the shkog. However, there are what we call avodos that are not technically avodos. Like, for example, in the case of avodah zarah, a classic avodah would be zvicha, which would be shchita, or haktara, or nisuch, or shtachava. But then there are other auxiliary violations of avodah zarah which would not generate a chiyuv kares. For example, machabek or menashek. Right? Let's say the avodah is to kiss or hug the avodah zarah, the idol. Or she'ein hayochid over aleh b'shogeg chiyuv chayav chatos. So if he violated avodah zarah in a particular fashion, he would not be chayav a chatos in the case of shkaga. And here he has an example here called avodah she'ein ba maisa. I don't know exactly what the case is. Avodah she'ein ba maisa. Second, if I have a case. No, he just says Dover She'ein Bo Maisa. That's what I have here. Apparently, it's a Gemara in Krisus. Daf Gimel. Okay, so we have to figure out what's a Dover She'ein Bo Maisa. So in any event, we have something called a Dover She'ein Bo Maisa, which, although you violate a Chiv Kares the Mezid, but nevertheless there's no Chatos B'Shogeg. And in such a case, if there was an avoda, then there's no chiyuv of par v'soyer latzibu. So again, we need two things. We need a Eve kares, but also we need a mice. Okay. So if we would summarize this last brisa, we would say it's interesting. There's a girsa here that Kirisnan. We have to open up a Gemara Horios. Might be a Mishnah, not a brisa. Anyway, the principle here is that par helen davashal tzibur or par mashuach milchama koin mashuach or shogeg bavodas kochavim based on a horas tos bezdin. In all these cases, the chiyuv for the carbon is conditional on the fact that a yachid would be chayav a carbon chatos bishkaga for that same violation. Anami. Now here the Gemara has a clear cut so that's a Mishnah, and again we're back in Horios. Whole mitzvah, every losa says Shabbat Torah shechayvan al stone karis al shigos chatos yachid mevi kizva o seira nasi mevi sa'ir Mashiach ubezdin meviim par. Bavodas kochavim yachid nasi umashiach meviim seira. Not sure what he means by seira. Yeah. Oh, that's only in the case of a yachid. You follow? A yachid brings a seira. Did we say that before? I'm just trying to refresh my memory. Yachid maybe seira, right? We said that. I just forgot. Okay. One second. A Nazir said, before brings a sa'ir, not a seir. What does he say? He says seira. That confused me a little bit. And a Kohen Mashua said,
Not just the Nasi drink.
oh, it does say that?
Nasi.
I don't see that.
Beginning of the fifth line.
Right, Nazi maybe Sa'ir. So what does it mean now when it says here Nasi Mashiach Muvim Seira? Yep. Put the comma in the right place. Okay, so Bezdin is Meviim Par. What is Zara? I don't get it. Here, Avodah Zara, Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach, Meviim Seira. What kind of Seira? 1 second. I'm just finished saying that a Kohen Mashiach brings a par, and a Nasi brings a soil. What changed over here? I missed something. Maybe the word Yachid, Yachid.
If it's a voter Zara, they all bring.
Wait, give me 1 second, Stephen. I'll do it because otherwise I won't be focused. A yeah, go ahead. Now I'm with you, Steve.
So I mean, outside of the voter Zara, the Nazi brings a fire. Yaki.
What, you combining Nasi and Avodah Zarah? Ah. Second. So Ubavodas Kochavim, then Yochid, Nasi, Umashiach, Meviim, Seira. Okay? And why? Because this is not your classic Nasi, Nasi case. In your classic case of Nasi with all other Isurim except for Avodas Kochavim, then we said the Nasi brings a Sa'ir. And we said that a Kohen Mashiach will bring a par. In a case of Avodas Kochavim, then whether it's a Yachid who normally would bring, let's say, a Kizba or a Seira, right? You would have that choice, a Kizba or a Seira. But now it's only a Seira. And in the case of a Nasi, he would normally bring a Sar, but now he's going to bring a Seira. And in the case of a Kohen, Moshiach, he would normally bring a par, but now he's going to bring a Seira. But if it's Tzibur, so if the majority of the Tzibur, based on a mistaken ruling handed down by the Bezna Gadol, violates Avodah Zarah, is Meviim par v'sa'ir par li'ola v'sa'ir lecha. Okay, now, how do we know that a carbon chatos is generated by zdono kares v'shigaso chatos? I think what the Gemara is asking me, Nani Mili, we'll see if this bears out. How do you know that there's no other chet that generates a chiyuv chatos other than zdono kares, and then it's shigaso chatos? Torah Banot. Now, this brayso is addressing the parsha Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur. And the pasuk says, "V'no da'a hachatos asher chatu oleha." We probably should open up a chumash Vayikra. Do we have one lying around? if you can open it up, Vayikra Dalid, Pasuk Yud Dalid, and it says, "V'nodaah chatos asher chatu alel." I'm assuming chatu is referring to the tzibur in the plural. Rebbe Omer, Nemar Khan, in this parsha of tzibur, it says Oleha, right? V'nodaah chatos asher chatu Oleha. V'nemar lahalon. And now we're talking about the parsha Lachos Isha. In Vayikra Yudal, it says Vishalach Osa Lo Sikach Mitzror Legalos Ervasa Oleh. So we have another time that the Torah uses the word Oleh. So we have Oleh in the parsha Par Helim Dovashot Tzibur, and we have the word Oleh in the parsha Vachos Isha. And we have to know the laws and the rules that govern Gzeir Shava. Whether you need Mufna and so forth and so on. I would assume that at least the second Oleh is completely superfluous, which allows you to activate the principle of Gzeir Shava. Is Malahal, and just like in the case of Isha Lachosa, it's Dorish Chayav and Alzdonu Koris, Falsh Yugaso, Chatos is Afkan, here too. In the case of what a Parahelim Dovichel Tzibur is Dorish Chayav and Alzdonu Koris, Falsh Yugaso. And this is Rebbe. So we see clearly that according to Rebbe, the pasuk Oleh in the parsha of Arayas of Achos Isha is coming for Gzeir Shava. And that Oleh in Achos Isha is going to shed a light on Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur. And it's going to tell you that just like Oleh in Arayas, right, Achos Isha is a Dover Chesdono Kores Shigosel Chata, so too Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur, where it also says Oleh, no Da'ah Chatos Shechat Oleh, is limited and restricted to a Dover Chechayov and Alzdonu Kores Fal Shigosel Chatas. And now we can begin to understand why Rebbe needed the Yibma to derive that an Erev and a Tzaras Erev are excluded from Yibum, right? V'lokcha and the Yibma. He could not derive it from the word Alel. So now Rebbe's in a bind, right? Because if he uses up Alel for this Gzeir Shava to teach me that a Parahelim Dovashel Tzibur is only generated by a Dovish Chayav and Alzdonu Kores, etc., then from whence is he going to derive the conclusion that an Erev and a Tzaras Erev are out of the ballpark as far as Yibum is concerned? He can't derive from Oleh because he needs Oleh for this particular Gzeir Shava. He has no choice but to derive it from the Lakcha or from the Yivma. So let's just work it out. So we have the following. We have Oleha in the parsha of Erva, and that could have excluded Achos Isha from, and all the arise therefore through Hekish from Yibum, or alternatively, Oleha in the parsha Achos Isha is coming to set the record of which hate that was violated by the tzibur based on the mistaken ruling of Besdin generates a parallel of Dovishal tzibur. It's got to be a cheches dono kores like achos isha, and that's because in the parsha parallel of Dovishal tzibur it says oleha, just like it says oleha in the parsha of Arayos. And then the question becomes, so from whence do you derive the conclusion that Erva and Source Erva are excluded from Yibum? And for that, we're going to have to introduce these two drushes of Lakha and V'yibum. And how do we know that he's allowed to be Machzig U'Shosef in Yibum? That we know from extra words in the Pasuk. V'lakha lo le'isha, or Yevamot Yavoleha to derive Malkarch. So it sounds like Rebbe, has organized all his drushes to derive all halachos. Okay. So let's make a note here. I'd like to study some of the insights of the Yalkut Biurim. If you could just give me an idea what you have copied here. And I know that now John is on board. He's got the Yalkut HaBiurim. That's good. It seems to me from the notations that I have, we got up to Samach He. Does that make sense to you? You have that, Jeff? Or is there, you have Samach He and Samach Vav?
Yeah.
Up to Samach He. All right. That's a that gives a lot of extra pairings. Okay, so now I think the last thing that we discussed here in the Yalkut Urim, correct me if I'm wrong, was Reb Chaim Ozer, the Achiezer, which is on Samach Dali. Does that make sense to you? We didn't finish that up?
No, I thought we did. We didn't do that. Was first that's right side of Summit.
On the bottom. We did that already, no?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we can move on to Samach Vav then? Yeah. Okay. I have the toast, but I didn't have Reb Shimon Shkop, but I think we did Reb Shimon Shkop. Let's see. Says here, okay. Wait a second. Where is? Oh, there it is. Let's take a look on before we do this. Let's go back to Daf Chesam and Aleph. I think it'd be a little bit of a chazara, which can't hurt probably. And we're looking for Rava Omar. How do I? There's a Tosus Rava Omar. Then below that, the Tosus Kiyitzra, right? Yeah. Does that make any sense? So if you're looking right in the middle between those two, a little bit maybe higher up, it says Rava Omar Erva Lo Tzricha Kro. And again, the whole sugya, if you recall, again, there are a lot of different patches and paragraphs, but the sugya is about erva. Do we need a pasuk to exclude erva from yibum? And we said that the Havamina was that essay of yibum would be docha, even a losas sheyesh bo kares, in the case of erva, and we need the pasuk oleh to exclude and pater up an erva from yibum. But Rava says erva lo tzricha kro. Why? The ein essay docha losas sheyesh bo kares. So therefore, once we have a principle that essay does not override a losas sheyesh bo kares, what was the havamina that yibum would apply in a case of an error? And now we're stuck with the question of what to do with the word oleh. And the Gemara says that according to Rava, ki yitzra kra leoleh is lemesar tsar. So we only need oleh to teach me that the tsara of an erva, of Yevamot who's an erva, is likewise excluded from yibum. Because the Torah writes in the parsha of Achos Isha ve'Isha lachosolo sikach v'tzor legalos ervasa oleha b'chayeha, which means that in oleha, in a case where the mitzvah of yibum of Yevavav yavo oleha ulekachalo lisha v'yivma, there's an iser of litzra. So we're talking about a situation in which a tzara was a second wife to sharing Reuven, who died with it, sharing Reuven with an erva. And Saras erva now is included or goes back into the original category of the Iser Ashes Af. Correct? Because there's no Yibum. And again, with regard to erva, Rava says, Ein Esei Dochalos Sheish Bo Kares. But with regard to the tzara, I mean, there's no problem of an additional erva. I mean, you have Eishes Ach, but the Torah commands you in Yibum. So right, so we need this extra possible leah to exclude tzaras erva. So the Gemara Sakasha, is it possible that Rav would say erva lo tzricha kra v'asanya? We have a brisa that says, Ainli Ella He, Sarasa minayin. And it seems that the Brisa was darshaning the pasuk oleh and was telling me that the erva itself is excluded from Yibum because of the word oleh. So how could Rava say we don't? Can Rava contradict this Brisa and assume that I don't need the word oleh to exclude an erva? The language of the Brisa is ainli ella he. He meaning I would only know from the word oleh he that an erva is excluded from Yibum, but tzarasa minayin. How would I know tzarasa? The Gemara answers mishum tzarasa. In other words, when the Brisa quoted the word oleh in the pasuk, it wasn't coming to exclude an erva that was excluded according to Rava Misvara, but rather it's coming to exclude saras erva. For ketani ainli ella hein. So it sounds like we're going back to the word oleh, and we're only excluding the arayos. And the Gemara answers mishum tzarasei. In other words, we really don't need a pasuk. The Brisa is only introducing the question that the Brisa wants to address about tzarasei. Okay, so that's the Gemara of Rav. Let's see if we can make any sense out of this Tosfos, Ibra Maskell Rav. I don't remember if we did this Tosfos, did we? Maybe we started it. Not sure. Rava Omar Erva Gufa Lo Tzricha Kro. Now, in the Masechet, he has a little bit of an introduction to this Tosfos. I'll read it to you. Right, the Tosfos starts with V'im Toma, correct? He says, the Gemara Mavur, the Kra, quote, V'isha lachosa lo sikach litzah l'gal servasa lo b'chayeho, itzrich lehecha de nosa meis, umeis, v'yakach nosa chai de lo miyabed. Right, so we're talking about, because this is to set up whole Ishtray, we're talking about a case where Reuven marries Leah, then he dies, and then Shimon marries Rachel. That's called what? That's called Nosa Meis Umeis. Yakach Nosa Chai. And the pasuk is telling me, Lo Sikach Litzor Legalas Avasalev Chayeh, there's no Yibum. Then he says, Ladasa Yibais Ema Be'ina Le Lekro Zer Lehekesha Rab Yonah, V'makish Kol Arayos Li'eshes Ach Leheter, Kamash Malon, Oleo Le'isa. Correct? So there was one possibility to say that the Hekesh goes the other direction, that we should equate all our eyes not to Achos Isha, but rather to Eshes Ach. If the Torah was Matir Eshes Ach, it should be Matir all the Arayos, and therefore we need the Pascal Leo to Esau. Then the Gemara tries to establish, well, how do you know that the Hekesh is coming le'isur. Maybe we should say the hektish is coming leheter. And therefore, the Torah is telling you, Dafka, that there is a heter yibum. And Rava says, Erev lo tzricha kra. The ein essay the Yevama Yovel Leo Dochel Lotus Hashesh Bakaris. The in Tomar, Tosis asks for Ha, Lechola Pachos, Itzra Kra, the Erva, Lehecha de Nosa Meis Umeis, Vyakach Nosa Chai. Below Tema, hold the Ishtray Ishtray. Why doesn't Rava sign on to the principle of hold the Ishtray Ishtray? And we should say, that since the Torah was matir the H's ach, it would be matir the other arayas as well, achos isha as well. Yesh lomar de Rava lesle de ula. Rava lesle de ula. So Ula was the one who said that if you have a combination of saras and keri, and the Torah was matir the mitzvah to go to put his fingers, etc., into the azara. So even though now he's also carried, we're going to be matir that as well. And that's called whole Vishtra Yishri. That's based on Ula, correct? That's based on Ula. So now we're holding that Rava Lesle de Ula. And the reason why a mitzvah, even if he's a carry, is allowed to put his fingers into the azara is because of bia b'mixus lo shmei bia. That's not called a violation of tuma, and that's it. So Tosas now is saying that Rava signs on to that man diomar, and therefore he doesn't have the basis for the principle of whole vitrei, and therefore there's no havamina that an erva would fall for yibum. The ode Omer read. So now Tosa apparently wants to say that Rava does accept Ula and be a b'miktzah shmei bia, and therefore you must assume that whole Ishrei. Why not apply that in the case of Yibum? Yesh l'chal. Gabi bal keri umitzora the shem tuma achas. V'ha moder Rava the amrin whole Ishrei came the chad lavu the chsiv bal keri ubitzora. That's the possible Yitamus Machanea. So there's one lav that it combines both Mitzora and Balkari. Aval Hacha. So here he brings a case of two brothers that marry two sisters. One of them dies. And one of the two women that he was married to, let's say he was married to two women, is what is Achos Ishto of the Yavam, of let's say call him Shimon. And now he says Aval Hacha Shemosem. He's got an Eishes Ach and he's got a Chos Isha. And Rava holds by him lo amrin on a whole Ishtra. in this case with the two shinos, it's not like the case of Balteri and Mitzora, and therefore we don't apply the principle of Hol Ishtre Ishtre. The Intomar, my Taima, the Rava, the Ervel Tzrifa Kro, the Leslie Rava, like Kesha Rab Yonah. Yonah has a hekesh of all arayos, and therefore don't we need the possible leah to exclude an Arab, because otherwise we could be makish all arayos in the context of Rabbi Yonah's hekesh to Eishes Ach, the Torah was matter Eishes Ach, and therefore we matter all the other arayos from Mokum Yibum. Yeshlomer the Vadai Sirulay. Rava definitely accepted the hekesh of all arayos. I mean, I think there are many sugas in Shas that are possible, that are built on this hekesh. Anyway, of a Rava, dafkel in Yisura dakshin rachmana devahacha iri krah asam lola inyan het teru. If it's only liisur, then the hekesh would have to be to achos isha rather than to Eishes Av. So he writes here in the second paragraph on Samach Vav, Kosva Tosis, Shitas Rava, Af b'mokum shenasa meis, b'meis v'achach nasa chai, ein le'tezut hol v'ishterish shnei time kosvu, echad mishum shecholik Rava as far as Ula, because he holds that Bia b'mikzas lav shmei Bia. And secondly, because Hol Ishtri only applies to Shem Echad and not to Shnei Shems. Ikshad to Re'even, Alo Mavur Lejib is Vachi B'shitas Rava She'ein Omrim V'Isur, Shehuta Hol V'Huta Rishon Huta Sheni Imo, El Rak B'Isur Shenidche Amrinan Kain. We don't apply the principle of Hol Ishtri in a case of a heter. We only apply it in the case of a dechia. Shol v'nidcha rishon nidcha sheni imo. You came b'shvil ma nidcha to atosis liyashiv is divrei Rava after shitas ula. Halo benkach ubenkach ein lomer hol b'yibum shekein isur eshes ach huter etzlo v'lo nidcha. How does he know such a thing? Valid. Yeah, but keep in mind, we're going to derive from Yibum the principle of Esei Docha Losas, even a Losas Shesh Mokaretz. If that be the case, then we're talking about Dechuya, we're not talking about Putra. So I'm not sure, I mean, this is Tzarech Ian, why the Turievan assumes as a Hanocha Pshuta that Yibum is Putra. The Gamis Kashamadua Hutzuchu Lomar Shesova Rava Shabia b'mikzas lav shmei bia. Yeah, if there's no possibility going to Rava to apply the principle whole Ishtray, so why does Tosfos have to bother with bia b'mikzas lav shmei bia? Even if bia b'mikzas shmei bia, but that's a case of dechuya, not a case of putra. Now he says, "V'tamar of Kiva Eger al Kushyasa Ashniya." Not exactly sure that Rabbi Kiva Eger was after Turiev. Actually, quoting the Turiev, I'm not sure. Anyway, Charei im Cholek Rav al Hoil behechrichu Cholek Af Al Masha Omer Ula Bia B'Miksa Shmei Bia. She'im Lokein Ech Yifarish is Divrei Abraisa She Hitira LeMitzor Shura Keri LaHachnis is Bahonos LaZora. What's the basis for this heter? Obviously, the case of Mitzor is the case of Hutra, and Rava doesn't have Hoel Vishrei Ishrei in a case of Hutra. He could not accept Bia B'Miksa Shmei Bia, because if Bia B'Miksa Shmei Bia, then you're going to derive the conclusion of Hoel Vishrei Ishrei of Ula, even in a case of Hutra. Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, based on all this logic, we can prove that Rava rejected the principle of Ula of Bia B'Miksa Shmei Bia. V'gam toma al masha kosmet b'riyevin shelehed yecholik Rava al hahoil because the change of books of klal lo omar sham Rava ela sheyutar misvara mistaber. Oh no, I'm sorry. Sheyoser mistaber lomar hoil v'isa shenidchem asher v'isa shehutar in hechrik midvarav shekenu al liba de emes. All right, so let's see where we got up to. Shitas HaRambam, the Makar Ptur Erva Vitsaras. Right, so we're up to the left column on page Samach Vav. Correct. So now I'll ask you how far, right? How far you got in the photocopy? You told me, Stephen, but I forgot. Samach Ted. So you're good to go. All right. So B'li Neder, let's just try to put a page in here. And if you could put also a line in yours, that we're up to Shitas HaRambam, B'Makar Ptur Erva Vitzaros. And that's what Ritz Hashem will pick up tomorrow. Okay.